السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ويسألونك عن ذي القرنين قل سأتلو عليكم منه ذكرا. إنا مكنا له في الأرض وآتيناه من كل شيء سببا فأتبع سببا حتى إذا بلغ مغرب الشمس وجدها تغرب في عين حمئة ووجد عندها قوما قلنا يا ذا القرنين إما أن تعذب وإما أن تتخذ فيهم حسنا. قال أما من ظلم فسوف نعذبه ثم يرد إلى ربه فيعذبه عذابا نكرا. وأما من آمن وعمل صالحا فله جزاء الحسنى وسنقول له من أمرنا يسرا. ثم أتبع سببا حتى إذا بلغ مطلع الشمس وجدها تطلع على قوم لم نجعل لهم من دونها سترا. كذلك وقد أحطنا بما لديه خبرا. ثم أتبع سببا حتى إذا بلغ بين السدين وجد من دونهما قوما لا يكادون يفقهون قولا. قالوا يا ذا القرنين إن يأجوج ومأجوج مفسدون في الأرض فهل نجعل لك خرجا على أن تجعل بيننا وبينهم سدا. قال ما مكنني فيه ربي خير فأعينوني بقوة أجعل بينكم وبينهم ردما. آتوني زبر الحديد حتى إذا ساوى بين السدفين قال انفخوا حتى إذا جعله نارا قال آتوني أفرغ عليه قطرا. فما استطاعوا أن يظهروه وما استطاعوا له نقبا. قال هذا رحمة من ربي فإذا جاء وعد ربي جعله دكا وكان وعد ربي حقا. صدق الله العظيم.
السلام عليكم.
الله أكبر الله أكبر. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. ونصلي ونسلم عليه وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وعلى أصحابه بجهدهم وتضحيتهم قام هذا الدين فرضي الله عنهم أجمعين. We remain in the same reflection with regard to who we are as human beings. In a series of khutbahs back, we talked about that the deen, being a Muslim, is to your benefit, is not to the benefit of Allah wa ta'ala. That's something which we need to have clear in our minds. Whether you practice or don't practice, that doesn't add anything to the kingdom of Allah wa ta'ala. It doesn't take away from Allah. The practice of the deen, the practice of Islam, هو يعني من أجل مصلحة الناس. يعني this is an important principle. يعني الالتزام بالدين هو من أجل مصلحة الناس. So when we talk about being a good, strong Muslim, we're talking about being the best human being that we could be for the sake of our own benefit. If we don't understand this issue clearly, then what begins to happen is that we don't understand what is in our best interest. And then we don't understand what is our position in relation to Allah wa ta'ala. And when we began way back and we talked about Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa as an introduction to my coming to this masjid, that Allah wa ta'ala talked about the human being, the status of the human being. That Allah wa ta'ala was creating in the human being a khalifa. That's a big deal. When we talk about our identity as human beings and what our position is on the earth and why it is that we see what we see in the dunya today. And we have to make clear, first of all, that here when we talk about the concept of khalifa, we're not talking about the concept of khalifa from a political angle. who's the leader of the ummah, and so on and so forth. Two things come about in that reality of the meaning of Khalifa. One is that the ulama understood the term Khalifa, and this is especially important for us as parents and for us as an ummah when we think about the continuity of the ummah. The Khalifa is that being that has basically children that come after. Thuriyah. Those who follow. The other idea that's there in the Arabic language in the meaning is the one الذي يتحمل التكليف, the one who takes the responsibility that is placed by Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala upon that being. What makes us unique is this reality that we either obey or we disobey. What makes us unique is in part that we think, but in reality right now with science we know that other creatures have intelligence. It's just that the human being is distinct from other creatures. In today's time, we talked about that there's a lot of confusing ideas. We as Muslims, we take our understanding of who the human being is from the Quran, and yes, from our understanding in the world and so on and so forth, we learn. The power of the eye, we understand the power of the eye with reflection in today's time, especially when you start looking at every advancement that's made on a cell phone. One of the selling points constantly is that it has a better camera. That camera, the idea for it, the reality of it, it comes from Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. But that idea is there in you living in the fact that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala created in you an eye that can see. It has proportion. Sometimes it has clarity. Sometimes it doesn't. That whole concept is there. As technology increases, we learn some things about ourselves, but we will never understand ourselves with accuracy without the Quran. And this is why today there's so much confusion about the concept of being a human being, about what it means to be a male, about what it means to be a female. There's so much confusion about what is my place and my responsibility on the earth. We, as the people of the Quran, we haven't done our job to clarify who the human being is in the earth. When we talk about the existence of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, this is one of the things that proves the existence of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala for us. That the human being is unique amongst all of the creation. We don't see any other life form do what we do on the earth. If you take just in the city itself, with dogs and cats and ants and everything that exists, you don't see any of those creatures go and transform the environment the way the human being transformed the environment. And neither do you see those creatures act in the same way that we act. We have to understand who we are. And before we were talking about understanding who we are and the different processes that we came from, al-alaq and so on and so forth, we said that what goes on inside of us is something that we have to pay attention to. Sometimes our thinking will take us in the wrong direction. Not everything that we think is correct or sound. That's why we have to make a distinction between what we think, and we have to make a distinction between what it means to be guided to the right thinking. This is especially important in our development. When we talk about the responsibility that we have as human beings, we have to realize that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala created us and gave us the ability to make decisions, but at the end of the day, the consequences for what we do is left to ourselves. فَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ خَيْرًا يَرَهُ وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ شَرًّا يَرَهُ. Here Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is telling us very clearly in our journey in the world. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, last time we were mentioning, sees everything, knows everything, especially what goes on in our hearts. But here, there's a rule that's laid down. And the rule that is laid down is that whatever you do of good, you'll see it. Whatever you do of bad, you'll see it. This is a rule that is important to internalize within ourselves. هل جزاء الإحسان إلى الإحسان. When we look at the idea of doing good, what's the reward for doing good? Is it not good? The Quran tells us. If everything that we do it only with the intention of what can I get out of it only from a material side, some things don't make any sense. Like the issue of giving zakat, or the issue of giving sadaqah. If there's no concept of iman that we believe in that which is good and that we're going to be rewarded for that which is good, sadaqah doesn't make any sense. Because in reality, at face value, if you're giving what's in your pocket, it's gone. You had $5,000, you had $2, you give it away, it's gone. But what we believe in Islam is that the return for that come from Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. But in business, at face value, if I put out $1,000, if I put $10,000, I need a return on that. If that return doesn't come in a week, in a year, then I took a loss. If it doesn't come after 5 years, I took a loss. There's no way that we can understand our existence in this dunya if we don't understand that this dunya, with regard to al-iwad, with regard to what we get in return, is limited. Nobody would do good. Everybody would just conform on the basis that there's punishment, we're being watched, or what's in personal interest. This is where we're at today, people. يعني الدنيا محكومة بالمصلحة الشخصية وليس بمقاصد الشريعة. The dunya, meaning our actions here, most of us are thinking about what is it that I can do for my own interests. We're not thinking about what it is that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is telling us about what are the goals of the dunya itself. This is one of the reasons why we have, for instance, we can have people treat other people bad, and as long as they don't get caught, it's not a problem for them. It's not a problem for them. This means here then that there's no concept of belief in the unseen, because we're not believing that we're going to be taken into account for what it is that we do. And for us as Muslims, we have to look at what is the reality of our aqidah, what is the reality of what it is that we believe. Because if it's the case that we're doing our actions without the consideration that whether it's pleasing to Allah or not pleasing to Allah, then what are we doing our actions for? لو نعترف أن هذه الدنيا مبنية على مقاصد وغايات وأسباب، والذي خلق كل هذا الله تبارك وتعالى، فالسؤال ما هو المطلوب من جهة الإنسان? That's what we come back to. If we believe this world is based on cause and effect and objectives and so on and so forth, then the reality is, what's our position in relation to that? Is this deficiency in Aqidah that we are not really believing that our actions have consequences, that we're not really certain that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is watching us, that Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala is the one that knows what's going on in the heart. Is the deficiency here from the angle of ghafla, forgetfulness. Yani adam al-dhikr. We're not remembering Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, that's leading us to actions which are destroying our relationships with one another. If we know as parents that we have a responsibility for our children, then how we deal with our children is not just based on what I want. It's based on what is in the best interest of that child, and not what I think is the best interest of that child, but what it is that Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala says is the best interest of that child. Because what I may think is in the best interest of that child may be the very thing that destroys that child. Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, أَفَرَيْتَ مِنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاءَ وَضَلَّهُ اللَّهُ عَلَى عِلْمٍ. يعني هذه آية خطيرة جدا. Because here Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala is telling us, have you seen those who take their desire for an object of worship, meaning they take their desire to be Allah. And their desire is what is guiding them, and is what is commanding them in the dunya, is what they live for. And so here, Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala is making it clear. That person goes astray. That person goes to their own destruction based on what it is that they're doing. Al-ilm. Based on the cause of how it is that they're functioning in the dunya. So when we talk about what's going on inside of us, it doesn't make sense. What's going on in our hearts, it doesn't make sense if we're not connecting our heart to Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. Desire is really right now what is causing a lot of the confusion in the dunya. And desire, people, in this dunya, it can never be fulfilled in total. The desire that we have as human beings is greater than what's in this dunya. That's why when we look with our eyes, we see beautiful things. MashaAllah, look at that car. MashaAllah, look at that house. We see good food. MashaAllah, I want to continue to eat. But then we have a limit. The desire, our desire inside, will never be fulfilled only by what is in this dunya. This is also why if we were to sin, it's not just an issue that we will be taken to account for that sin in the hereafter. Is that sin has an impact on us. It has an effect on us. It will never satisfy us because that's not the purpose of the human being. When we look at desire, desire is telling us about the reality of Jannah, which comes after this dunya. Because in Jannah is a place where your desire and following it, it doesn't go against you. Your desire in Jannah is something that will be continuous, and it will be nothing but good, and it will be pleasing to Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. But in the dunya, following desire without limit is not only destructive to you, it's destructive to those around you. And what it does is it humiliates you because it makes you worse than the animals. The animals are in a state of Islam. They don't disobey Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. So even if the animals do certain things that human beings don't do, they're within the rules of Islam. And those rules of Islam show that that animal is doing what is pleasing to Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. But you, the human being that Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala created you in dignity, لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, and made you upright, and gave you an intellect, and gave you the ability to dominate in the earth, and gave you the ability to be creative, to discover things. Your role is not like other beings in the world. And so when we look at the whole idea of what goes on inside of us, not everything that comes to our desire we follow. If we say that we believe in the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or in Prophet Muhammad himself alayhi salatu wasalam, then the idea is that we're saying that we believe that this is what it means to be a human being. Not what the scientist says means to be a human being. The model that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave us is what? Is supposed to guide what the scientist says to be a human being. Because the scientist will change his position يعني من يوم بعد يوم. A few hundred years ago in Europe, they were saying that the world was flat, and the Muslims were saying that the world was not flat. The Muslims were saying that the world was somewhat round, and this was something that they had achieved by science. And then science began to develop more and more in Europe, and they changed their position. The Muslims, when it came to science, they never had a problem with dealing with science, because the Quran encourages us to think. Sometimes it was the problem that some Muslims went to the extreme of thinking. But at the end, they never denied who Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala was as far as Allah existed. But when you have science without Iman, it's easy to claim anything you want to claim because it's not guided by anything. Science is the application of the intellect to observing what's going on in life through a systematic process. If that intellect is not guided in some points, they're going to make some mistakes in those points. And we say clearly, the denial of the existence of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is impossible to prove it by science. And the same thing we say, it's impossible to say that one thing is another thing when we know that thing to be the same thing for so long. We're talking about the human being. For millions of years, we said that this is a male and it has these biological functions, and that's what it is. This is a female and it has these biological functions, and that's what it is. Yeah, some things in the culture may change. But at that level, we never had any confusion on the face of the earth in this time period. Mostly all of the civilizations on the face of the earth understood that if the human being follows only their desire, it will lead to the destruction of that human being, and it will lead to the destruction of the society. Whether it was the Confucians, whether it was the Christians, whether it was the Jews, even the Greeks themselves, who had some issues in their civilization, they understood the power of the intellect, and they understood the power of disciplining the self. When we follow our desire without limit, like we said, take the example of eating continuously without limit. What's the consequence of that? Think about it. Don't just come into the khutbah and listen and don't think and don't reflect on it, but think about what's the consequence of that. It's not the consequence of that it does you harm, that it does you damage. So it's the same reality when we start talking about on the spiritual level. Just following our desires and following sins, don't you think there will be an effect or an impact on that? And that's why when we look, the ayah, it says, وَضَلَّهُ اللَّهُ عَلَى عِلْمٍ وَخَتَمَ عَلَى سَمْعِهِ وَقَلْبِهِ وَجَعَلَ عَلَى بَصْرِهِ غِشَاوَةً. This is the consequence. Let's put it for ourselves clearly here. The life, the un-Islamic life for us, it leads us to that reality. It doesn't allow us to be the full human being. So here, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is saying that now your ability to hear it becomes sealed for you. And we talked about knowledge. That knowledge comes from revelation. We talked about knowledge comes from intellect. Knowledge comes from our senses. Right now, what I'm saying is something that you can hear, something that you can think about. Now imagine if your thinking is going in the wrong direction, and now your ears are being closed to having the ability to hear, and your heart is being sealed, and your eyes are being veiled, then that means now you went into a position where you were a being that was upright, a being with dignity, a being that was free and can make decisions, to a being which is being destroyed within itself. Your thinking is not going to help you. Your hearing is not going to help you. Even your heart itself is not going to help you. You're deaf, dumb, and blind, although you're living with an intellect, with eyes, with ears, with a heart. And so when we talk about the reality of what it means to be a human being, we have to realize that doing good is for our benefit, and doing good has an impact on us. And we have to realize that doing harm is doing sin is to our harm, and it has an impact on us. This is why when we begin to see, and one of the things that I'll say this especially to the parents, when we begin to see in our children the behavior changes, when we begin to see in our children certain attitudes, we shouldn't judge them, but we should know that something is going on. When there's addiction that's taking place, when there's stuff on the internet that shouldn't be seen, and it's being seen with continuity, when there's certain thinking that's there, or there's hours of video games that are being played, but we don't take time with our children or with our families to stop that, all of that has an impact. It has an impact on the way that we see, and it has an impact on the way that we feel, and it especially has an impact on our iman and our hearts and our state of well-being. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر لي ولكم الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. We ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to guide us and to aid us and to help us. And we ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to protect our hearts. And we ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to protect our eyes and to protect our ears. And we ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to guide us to that which is good, and to take those that have passed and be merciful upon them, those who have gone to the next world by way of death. And we ask for those who are sick, that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala heal them. And we ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to open the doors of rizq. Aqimus salah.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Allahu Akbar. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.